For many children, their grandparents and parents are their heroes, heroes who held them, nurture them, and love them. But what kids don't really know is that sometimes even those heroes need help. Every day, up to 360 South Africans are affected by strokes, with data suggesting that about a third of those who suffer a stroke will die and a quarter will be left with a life-changing disability. The risk of a stroke increases with age, and in South Africa, stroke is the most common cause of death of people older than 50 years. For more now on this, especially October being the stroke month, we are joined from our Seapoint studio by the CEO of the Heart Foundation, Pamela Naidoo. Good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for joining us here on SA Today.
Good afternoon to you. Thanks for having me.
Prof, maybe we firstly need to get an understanding of what stroke is.
Yes, so basically a stroke is literally a brain attack. And what happens is that you can either have a blockage in your brain or you will have a blood vessel that bursts, and it then stops the supply of oxygen and nutrients to your brain, which leads to the death of your brain cells in that particular area. And as you know, the brain is so important for your day-to-day functioning, your power to think and to walk and to do physical and mental activities. So when you suffer a stroke, you literally you affect some part of your functioning. Yeah. And it's quite devastating for many people.
It is indeed. And we know that October is Stroke Month. What's the month aimed at? And perhaps also talk to us about the prevalence of stroke in South Africa. I've given a bit of a background and some numbers on my introduction, but how are we affected by stroke in South Africa?
Yes, very important question. So on a day-to-day basis, there's almost 360 people affected by stroke on a daily basis in South Africa. Now, if you look at a stroke is part of a cluster of diseases that we call cardiovascular diseases. And so heart diseases and strokes together is the second commonest cause of death in South Africa, that's after HIV and AIDS. So it's a pretty serious burden of disease. If you look at the gender issue, you find that a lot of women are also affected by stroke. And it's unfortunate that South African women are, on average, heavier. So they're more overweight and obese than the males are. And, being overweight puts pressure on the body to function. It leads to high blood pressure. And the higher your blood pressure, the more prone you are to having a stroke.
And we hear stories, Prof, about what causes stroke. So you've just mentioned the issue of the issue of obesity and overweight as well. But what are the other contributing factors? What do we need to be on the lookout for as people?
Yes, very important question, because it's really not about one thing you do. It's about a whole combination of behaviors, I would call it, So if you're not leading a healthy lifestyle, you increase your risk for having a stroke. So some of the key ones are high blood pressure, which I've mentioned already. Then you have smoking, tobacco smoking. Tobacco is a killer. Smoking it is a killer. It's not just linked to cancer only. It's also linked to cardiovascular disease, which is heart diseases and strokes. And the more you smoke, the greater your risk. If you eat unhealthily, so when you eat unhealthily, you're going to increase salt and sugar intake. And salt intake in particular, increased salt intake leads to high blood pressure. So, it's all interrelated. So I think the key is to attempt to live a little bit of a healthier lifestyle. One other key factor is being physically active. So not really going to a gym every day, but just taking more steps on average than you would otherwise. Don't just sit all day. You really need to get your blood flow quite consistent throughout the day.
And I think what is even more worrying now is, as I said on my introduction, that a stroke is the most common cause of death of people older than 50 years. But the reality is we are now starting to see younger people getting stroke as well.
That's very true, although I must say that over the age of about 40, 45, you should become way more aware of your, for example, whether you have hypertension or not. You do get the odd occasion when younger people are affected by it. You would have seen not so long ago, there were, you know, a few rugby players, for example, that were affected. You get it in very extreme sports people too. Yes, so it can happen, but it's not as common as for older people. So people over the age of about 40, 45.
And the Angels Initiative is on a mission to save South African heroes, meaning the parents and the grandparents here, by getting families to join the first 112 heroes. Talk to us about this initiative. I know that you're going around schools across the country.
Yes, thank you so much for asking about that. It's a really exciting initiative, which has started actually in Europe by an ex-South African. So we're now piloting it in South Africa. And the important message here is that we want to teach young people how to recognize a stroke amongst people that they you know, are close to. So grandparents, parents, maybe the teachers and the older people around them. And it's a very fun way of teaching young children between the ages of about 5 to about 9 years old how to recognize a stroke. And so the FAST heroes, FAST is an acronym for the symptoms of stroke. So we're teaching the young children that F is for face. So basically, if you're around someone you love and then suddenly they appear to be very different. So if one side of the face droops, for example, because remember, stroke, one side of your body is affected. It's either the entire left side or the entire right side. So children are then taught to know FAST. F is for face, and then A is for arms. So if you have a droopy one arm, you know, that doesn't stay up voluntarily, it involuntarily droops down. And then S is for speech. So suddenly someone starts to talk gibberish, so to speak, and you can't understand them, then you've got to suspect a stroke. And then the T is for getting that person, learning to call, you know, your 211 and it's an emergency number, and get that person to a hospital on time.
Well, this is
so it's a fun way of teaching children that they've got to be aware that, you know, older people are prone to certain types of medical conditions.
It is indeed a very educational initiative. They can too save lives if they know this fast test. Well, Prof, we'll leave the discussion at this for now. Thank you so much for coming through.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you on behalf of the Angels as well.
Well, only our pleasure. Well, there you have it. That's Professor Pamela Naidoo. She is the CEO for the Heart Foundation, talking to us about October being a stroke month, and they have what they call a fast test, as she said. The first letter face, you must smile and see if one side sort of droops. Second letter arm, you must raise both arms. If the other one drifts down, then it's a problem. Speech, you have to repeat any sentence. If there's some trouble in speaking or understanding, then you need to get help. Time, they say time saved is brain function saved as well. So those are the important factors that you need to take into consideration to see if perhaps you may be suffering from stroke or not.